There's a great panel we have this evening. We have John Choi from Crofie here to talk to us, and also Philip Coxell from McGregor Coxell. We have our fabulous moderators that you all know, Bob Nation and Stephen Varady. I'll hand over to Stephen now, who will introduce for you.
Thank you, Darlene, and thank you everyone for turning up tonight. Welcome to Double Talk number 17. Can you believe it? It's now over a year since we started this architecture talk series, and we're extremely pleased with how it has grown and how successful it has become. This is our final talk in Perth for this year, but we will definitely be back, even bigger and better in 2017. Now to our speakers, John Choi from Crofie in Sydney and Philip Coxell from McGregor Coxell, also based in Sydney. Philip Coxell was raised in the western suburbs of Sydney. He completed horticulture at Ryde before travelling and working overseas for 7 years. Philip returned to Australia and studied landscape architecture in Canberra, and then went off to work overseas for 10 years in England and then in Asia. During that time, he also completed a solo bicycle ride from France to Gambia in West Africa. After having studied landscape architecture together at the University of Canberra in the mid-1980s, Philip Coxell eventually joined Adrian McGregor in 2000 to form McGregor Coxell. McGregor Coxell are urban designers and landscape architects, recognised at both a national and international level for their innovative, environmentally based design solutions. In 2009, McGregor Coxell were awarded the German-based Topos International Practice of the Year Award, the first non-European practice to receive it. Well done. Philip has more than 26 years international experience in landscape architecture, urban design and planning. His expertise lies in leading and managing the design of large-scale, complex projects, from concept to the resolution of the final details, and then overseeing their construction and contract administration on site. He's undertaken this role for many of their leading projects, including Ballast Point Park in Birchgrove in Sydney, and the former BP site, also located in Sydney Harbour at Wakeford. Some other notable projects Philip has been involved in includes the Bays Waterfront Promenade in Pyrmont, Walsh Bay Arts Precinct in Sydney, the Genolan Caves Master Plan, White Bay Power Station Urban Design Services, Qian Hai Guwan Park in Shenzhen, China.
I thought you were Chinese, that was good.
I'm sure Bob would do it better. Lizard Log Parklands, was that good?
Yeah, that was good.
In Western Sydney, Blacktown Showgrounds in Sydney, the Calyx in the Royal Botanical Garden, Sydney, along with the important National Conservatory in the Australian National Botanic Gardens in Canberra, competition-winning entry announced barely 2 weeks ago, something like that, and designed together with John and Crofie. Just finally, in 2010, Philip's work was recognised by the Sydney Morning Herald, where he was identified as one of Sydney's most influential professionals in improving the quality of life in Sydney. Please welcome Philip Coxell.
That was a nice introduction. Sit down now, mate. I'm going to try and keep to the time frame, so I'm going to set my watch here. There we go. Okay, it's ticking. So we've got 35 minutes. Look, thanks very much for having us, and thanks very much, Steve, for the introduction. It's been great to be here. I was in Perth probably when I was about 22, hay carting, and now I'm back here in a suit. That's really impressive. The talk I'm going to give tonight is a little bit self-indulgent, and I really hope you forgive me, but I know you're all designers, and it may be as you go through it, you might see a little bit of your own journey in that, and I'm fascinated by the process of design and how we get to where we are now, you know. So I'd like to take you on a little bit of a journey, my own personal journey. And before I start on that journey, I just need to tell you a little bit. Steve introduced me, that came from Western Suburbs. Our background is everything to us, I think, in a lot of ways. You know, that's the DNA that we bring to the whole thought process. I come from a family of 5 kids. Dad's worked in a factory fitter and turner. Auburn, Western Sydney. You know, design when we sat around the table wasn't the first thing that we discussed, actually. It was the price of eggs and, you know, a few other things. So to my amazement, one day my dad came to us and he said, while we're sitting around having dinner, he said, "Hey guys, just to let you know, we've just negotiated to buy our own house, the house that we're living in, and we're going to pay it off over 20 years, but it's ours. So do you know what we can do now? We can paint it." And so we all got so excited by this, and we thought, okay, we're going to paint the house. Okay, so what colours can we do it? So we all got together and we all picked colours, and so we had this beautiful arrangement. I remember the living room. It was, yeah, well, I'll show it to you. Mine was yellow. My sister was, anyway. Every room in the house went like this. It was like, you know, somebody tripping on drugs, I tell you. So, only in retrospect do I think back on this and I just go, oh my God, how did we live here? But we were so proud of this. We were checking, bring mates over and check out what we've just done, you know. Anyway, funnily enough, my dad played tennis, and after a little while, he let me know that this guy that he met at tennis was what they call an architect. I said, "Oh, architect, that sounds pretty interesting. What do they do?" He said, "Oh, they're designers." I said, "Okay." So they invited us over for some strange reason to have sponge cake and tea. And I was so excited. Why was I so excited about this fact I'm going over to see this architect's house? I don't know. But when I got over there, I thought, wonder what colours this guy's going to do. This is going to be something else, you know, but how can he beat what we just did? But maybe he could. And he did. And I walked in and I went, oh my God, what's he done here? What's going on? And I remember leaving in the car with Dad going, what's going on here? And I remember Dad turning to me and going, maybe he's a shit architect, you know? He can't get it right. You know, maybe just, you know, hasn't got it. It's pretty bad, isn't it? Can I just pause at this moment and just let you know the seamless quality I've just introduced Austral Bricks camera. Second slide, and I've already got him a promo. But I've also called it shit in the same breath, so maybe it's not as good as maybe I originally suspected. Anyway, so the next thing happened after I finished school. My mum said to me, look, I've got you an apprenticeship working in a nursery. You know, any job's a job. I don't know why we did the nursery thing, because I'd recently, with my dad, concreted over the backyard. But, you know, never seen a plant in my life, but here we are in the nursery. And when I'm in the nursery, I had to go and do horticulture, as Steve mentioned. And I was quite fascinated. I got in the library at the horticultural college, and I opened up this book that changed my life. And it had Japanese gardens in it. Now, Western Sydney, I'd never seen anything like this. I turned the page, I look at this, and I go, oh, this is another world. Wow, look what's going on. Look at the beauty of it. And I was really quite taken through it, but I flipped through the pages. I got right to the very end. I remember this last image that I saw, and it's this one. And all of a sudden, my heart went, what? What's this? I mean, where are the plants? Where's the soil? Where's anything? I mean, this is a bit of a joke. What's going on here? I couldn't believe that anybody called this a garden. And I just went, oh, yeah, that's a bit embarrassing. Kept on turning. 3 years later, I'm in the same library. I accidentally get out the same book, turn over, see this image again. This is, sorry, actually 2 years later. And I look at it, and my heart just goes, oh, I cannot believe how it impacted on me. What happened between the start when I looked at it and thought it was absolute farce, and I'm looking at it now just totally blown away by this thing. I had to understand what was going on here. And so I started to understand all these called Zen gardens, and I read a little bit more, and it had this thing about, you know, that Zen talked about, you know, these, I think they're known as Noah's. Anyway, they got a name for it. And it was about, you know, what's the sound of one hand clapping? And, you know, your brain goes. I haven't got a clue. Could never figure it out, but I was fascinated that a garden was more than just a garden. A garden took you to an intellectual place that was far more than what I could have ever imagined. I didn't go back home to my concrete backyard and sit and meditate, but it did ask that question. What is out there? What is out there? I had to go to Japan. I had to go and understand it. I had to go and live there, and I had to unravel this thing. So it was a huge journey for me to go over there. And when I was over there, I got this introduction to this. Now, this is a beautiful kind of subset into a quick kind of freeway into, short-circuiting the intellectualisation of what is the sound of one hand clapping. This is Daruma-san. Maybe a few of you actually know Daruma-san, but Daruma-san represents a Zen monk who sat for 12 years at that garden, and at the end of 12 years supposedly got enlightenment. Now, enlightenment's not a bad thing, actually. And so this guy represents him, so he's got no legs because he can't walk after 12 years, and there's this solid head just sitting there all-knowing, and the bottom of the base is actually got a weight so that whenever you hit Daruma-san, he bounces back up. And so you paint in one eye when you have a wish to try and improve yourself. And then every time you struggle with that wish, you whack Daruma-san and he bounces back up, proving that no matter what life's challenges, you can come back up and you can solve things. And if you get two eyes in it, then you've solved all your problems. Well, I thought that was kind of cool. And while I was there, I got introduced to an architect. A guy said, well, if you like him, you might like this guy. And I'm sure you all know this guy. And I particularly loved this piece because I call it the half and half house, actually. And it's half and half because half of the house is a building and the other half is a garden. And rumour has it that Undo was asked by the client to give him a house and a garden on the very tight site that he's got here. In classic Undo, he goes, yeah, okay, leave it with me and come back. So he comes back after it's been built. And there's his garden. And he goes, yeah, okay, lovely house. Where's the garden? It's coming, right? He goes, no, this is the garden. And he goes, yeah, okay, I'm in a bit of trouble with that. So he says, okay, what you do, sit here for a day and I'll come back and we'll have a chat. So he sits there for the day, comes back in the afternoon and he goes, so what do you reckon about your garden? He goes, yeah. Still not convinced. He says, okay, that shadow in the morning, where was that shadow? And where is it now? And that leaf that's laying in the corner, was that always there? And that butterfly that is flying across the concrete, was that always there? No. Ah, what a beautiful garden you have. That's pretty incredible that you can think past so much in thinking of design, and this was really quite beautiful for me when I saw this, and I've always been a great fan of Under ever since. But I was young, and yeah, that was good enough for that period of time. Then I thought, screw this, I'll go travelling, and I took about 7 years just kind of travelling around the place. I was a great surfer, surfed all over the place and really enjoyed myself. But unfortunately, in Guatemala, I met a German girl, got married, and that was it, right? So I had to get real. I had to come to terms with life as a mature adult male, like some of you are here. Not all of you, obviously. And so I came back to study in this thing that I'd heard about en route, which is called landscape architecture. And so here I am as a young, energetic young lad. I'm the one on your left. There I am, yeah, idealistic. And funnily enough, that guy there on your left is Adrian McGregor, who's the other partner for McGregor Coxell. So he's the McGregor to the Coxell. I would never have thought at the time, if you'd asked me the last guy I would have ever joined up in business, he was him. But somewhere or other, you marry the person sometimes you least expect, and so we did. So, but when I studied, I really loved the idea in study of design, and I was fascinated by the process of design. Design, as we all know, just doesn't come. Design is not a box you open up and pull it out, it's just there. Design is this struggle, this this intellectualization of finding your way through to get to the answer. The answer's there already, of course. You just need to find your way through to it. But it's that struggle and that way of finding it that I find really quite beautiful. And it has kind of references to Schrodinger's thought experiment, which some of you may or not know. Does the cat die or does it live? And then I quite like the idea that, hey, you don't have to have all the colours like I had in the house. That actually, you can just say, okay, let's treat it, everything is white. After that point, I'll work with everything else. And Maya, of course, did that. I was particularly taken with these guys because I just love the way they use materiality. And some of that obviously comes back in some of the work you'll see in some of the stuff. But when you see it for the first time, you just go, wow, look at the gorgeousness, the way they've used it, the massing, the whole thing about that is truly something beautiful. And a lot of the other work references, not that, but the way they use material and how they work with it. I mean, it can be quite poetic just because of the materiality. Again, I love the way that he just said, oh, screw it, I'll just use concrete. Not always concrete, but in the majority concrete, but also that handrail detail. You look at Undo's work, Undo doesn't say, oh, I've got to come up with a new idea for a handrail. Well, there's the handrail, there's the balustrade, I always use that, that's what I do. And I kind of thought, well, taking out all the wheat, all the chaff, to get to the core issue. Sometimes we don't need all the complexity associated with it. And then, of course, Murcutt and his beautiful work and obvious reference to so much of that had preceded it. And I went to a talk once that somebody gave about Glenn, and they said a beautiful thing. And that beautiful thing was that every time Glenn takes up a piece of work, he hones. He's honing his craft. He's just refining. He's not looking to chuck a whole pile more things in. He's looking at understanding what he's doing and getting better and better and better at it. I've shown you all this. Does not necessarily mean that I've taken all this in and I've come to any of this. I stumble and bumble and are still stumbling and bumbling. But there are certain things that help you align your thinking, and these are the kind of bits and pieces of it. Anyway, after that, as Steve said, I went and worked overseas. I worked 4 years in England, actually worked 7 years in Hong Kong. I had a really beautiful experience in Hong Kong. I actually worked with Bob Nation in Hong Kong on a couple of projects. And I have a lasting memory of a late afternoon on one project we worked. And I'd shown Bob this, what I thought was an incredibly beautiful piece of work. And Bob sat there and he twisted his moustache and he had that little glint in his eye. I don't know if you know Bob, but if you get around later on, you'll see he's got this glint in his eye, right? He didn't have to say it was shit, but just by the way that he communicated, I knew that was garbage, And I understand it because at that stage I was going through this bizarre period of, I wanted to be a punk landscape architect. Picture that, right? I wanted to get out there and I wanted to be, look at me, I can do great shit. And Bob just simply solved the problem. He actually took me out later on, got me drunk and said, Phil, hey, look, it's all okay. But I kind of then collapsed not after Bob, but after 7 years of working there, doing a whole pile of stuff. The great thing about Hong Kong was we built, we screwed up, we learnt, we moved on, we kept on building, and I got a lot out of that. But at the end of 7 years, I kind of given up, and I don't know, I didn't think I had it anymore. And I thought perhaps the best thing for me is just to go back to very simple, meditative thing. And I got a lawn mowing business in a ute, and I just kind of mowed lawns, and I mowed it nice and straight. It was a beautiful existence, for probably 2 years. And then one day, Adrian McGregor, who you've seen previously, called me up and he said, hey, Phil, how would you like to go on the design competition? End of my life. That was it. We went and we did some crazy bloody idea, let's go and show them what we can do. We lost, of course. The next one we did, we were a lot more conservative, and we actually won it. And so started this vortex where you get sucked in. I was on at the edge of a black hole. I didn't want to get sucked in. I was going to not get involved in this. I was going to say, but gradually design sucked me in. And so we started doing a couple of little projects. This is Atlas Apartments, part of the design we won for Green Square. And obviously you can see my sad Japanese reference in there. And then another small apartment that we did. But we kind of got our start. And we sort of got a grounding. And then one day, I'm just checking the time so I don't overrun. But we live in Manly, right? We had a small office in Manly, and I'm walking down the street with Adrian one day, and he goes, "Oh, see those guys over there? That's them. They're the guys who won that New York competition, you know?" And it was John Choi. He'll show you that and brag about it later, so you don't have to worry about it. But it was one of those kind of things, you know, oh, wow. Oh. And John, I think, waved once. I now call him Choi boy. Got no respect for the guy. But what happened was, Adrian set it up. He said, look, you ought to go home and talk to John. We're going to try and have a go at this Parramatta Road competition. Saturday morning, why don't you go over and see what you can do? I can't make it, but John will be there. And I'd never met the guy except waving from a distance. And we sat down, and probably in 15 minutes, we had this, we cracked this baby, you know. We came up with this idea that, you know, the complexity of Parramatta Road, you might not know it, but a very complex fit of Sydney, could be solved if we just understood the forces at work and use those forces at work to create a great outcome. So we came up with urban judo. And from that point, we basically have worked together off and on over a number of years. We also were in court for 3 years over this, which was part of the success of winning a design comp in Sydney. Sometimes that's the joy that you get. But we established a great working relationship. In some cases, we lead. In some cases, John leads. So I'm going to show you a couple of projects where we have led. John will probably show you, I think only one because he's only got one to show. He's going to show you one project of the one that he did with us. But it's the beauty of, and we talked a little bit about it before, Steve, that there is a relationship now between architecture, landscape architecture, urban design, that the barriers are blurring and that we all have a role to come together to make this the best possible outcome. The releasing of this kind of like ego and coming together collectively to create this. The hardest thing is that when you sit down for the first time, the ego being broken down, that sense of I'm really good, how good are you kind of thing. You know, you're the landscape arm and I'm going to show, you know. You need to get past that point so you can have the dialogue and you can challenge one another at the same intellectual level and really draw from one another's strengths. And so it's an honour to be talking here tonight with John about, you know, where we've taken it, but also where the profession can go as a result of it. So I'm going to show you essentially 4 projects that possibly are some of our major ones. Sorry, the first one is actually 2 projects. I'm sorry, I'll go back. But they're kind of connected. If I could, will that take me back? No, it won't. Okay. So there's 2 that are kind of sister projects. Sorry, thank you. Thanks, Steve. So they're kind of 2 sister projects. I'm sure you'll recognise Sydney Harbour Bridge, the Opera House. Those 2 green things you probably kind of can see are 2 projects. There are 2 oil storage facilities that were built in Sydney during just before the Second World War. They now become redundant, so being transferred both of into parks, likely for us. So the BP Park is the first one that we did. Now there's a great story here, and I like stories. That's why the whole thing's called Designer Story. I totally underbid on this. Didn't have a clue what it would cost us to do it, and so I won it. there was not an inkling that I was the right guy for the job at all. It was North Sydney Council, and they want the cheapest bastard they could find, and I was it. But it worked out perfectly for us because it set the groundwork for the next bit of work that we got. Anyway, should I be pointing somewhere in particular, or I just keep pressing this?
Up here.
There we go. So you might have seen this one, Dallas Point. When we got on the project, they had no money. They had aspirations, but they totally ran out of money. So the idea here is, also it goes back to my roots a little bit. The idea of using very cheap materials. The materials that I had around me as a kid, the cricket nets, the chain link fencing of the cricket nets, galvanising, all those things were something that I was very familiar with. And I wanted to try and see how you could put that and reframe it so that people might see it as something other, something beautiful. So how can you put a material that you normally expect to be, you know, like shit of Western Suburbs, it's crap, it'll always be crap. Maybe things can be better than that if you look at it in a different way and explore how you can detail it. And that was the challenge that we tried to do here. Sorry, you're going to flip again. So you can see the extent of the chain link fence and gal, and this is probably one of the first times that, you know, significant amount of work had been done gal in that frontline marine environment. Should I point this over there, should I?
Under the cupboards. Cupboards.
There we go. And there's a little bit of a dialogue here because this is the start of something that ultimately then leads itself. I mean, you can see clearly the Napa Valley with Herzog and the interest in Gavian. This is just a little bit of an infill to a wall that was broken down that we infilled, but it led to other things later on. But just the composition that we're working with there. Sorry.
Over there.
Thank you. That will help. So we'll quickly go to BP, and BP was a project that we got on the back of that. Luckily enough, I got this one because we did a pretty good job on BP, and they kind of said, oh, okay. We weren't the cheapest this time, so that was kind of good as well. But the story here is that how could we build this facility, which used to be an oil storage and grease manufacturing plant in such an incredible location on Sydney Harbour. The last promontory after the Opera House that was left to be developed. So it was a great honour to work on it. But the idea is, well, how can we talk about what this represents in terms of change? Well, the change for me was that one culture built this oil refinery storage plant. This next one wants to build a park. So we've now come to understand that this is a very important piece of land. And so we didn't want to destroy other landscapes in the rebuilding of this park. So when I first went out there, I saw all the buildings, all the structures, all the things that were there. And I thought maybe we could break all this down and use it to rebuild the park rather than going out and cutting sandstone and all the new materials that you normally expect. So that led to the whole dialogue of what Ballast Point is about. And the cradle to cradle idea and technology.
Sounds perfect. Someone's fiddling with the mouse.
Sorry, my clock has gone hammered.
Don't worry, just go.
Sorry.
Just talk.
I don't want to run.
Don't distract yourself, just
okay. So this is just what we did, everything we did. We picked up every piece and we said, okay, how can this be used recycled? Concrete. We used recycled aggregate in the concrete. We used kiln ash from power stations as part of the cement component to it. We looked at rebuilding all the walls using broken rubble material, all the timber recycled, all the plant material provenance stock, so seed collected from the local area. The soil came out of skips that was being collected around Balmain and taken to a recycle centre. Just the panels for the structures, all taken from the metalwork around the site itself. So the question, once that design story is embedded, it answers everything that you do. So everything has to line up with that philosophy. And it drove something that I thought was really quite beautiful at the end of the day. A very complex site, but ultimately, and it's grown significantly since then, but quite a beautiful outcome, I think. And I have to give John credit here because this is the entry building that we worked on together. And I remember I went home in the weekend and I was saying to John, it has to be recycled. We have to work with materials. How do we work with these materials? And I had this great idea over the weekend that I get these sticks and kind of as a roof cover. And I was kind of really excited come racing. John, hey, got this sticks idea, mate. Check this out. And John very quietly, as he always does, lets me go through what and he said, I actually had an idea. I'm like, what? You had an idea? And he said, what about if we use recycled seatbelt straps? And we use kind of this idea of the surfboard leg straps, the Velcro things to tighten them up. And we actually found a guy that was selling seatbelts that had failed the safety test. And so they had to get rid of it. And we found, this is really gorgeous, some community groups that could dye and change the colour. So the dye represents, the colour represents the Balmain tigers, the stripes obviously have all that indication of the tigers, blah, blah. But it worked out so beautifully, and the simple composition is really something I'm very proud of. And it flows right the way through the park. I'll be very quick on this. But the detailing, I have to tell you, I did the detailing on the timber, but John did the detailing on the door, and they line up perfectly because we worked so closely together. And I kept saying, John, don't forget that. Yeah, Phil, it's okay. And this is the Tank 101, largest tank that used to store oil on site. And it was the idea of, well, okay, if a renewal's taking place, let's take fossil fuel and turn it into renewable energy. So what used to contain fossil fuel is now wind turbines and turning and creating the energy for the site. And all those panels around there are taken from the old tank and recycled and reused in a different way. I'll just accelerate now. Sorry. Yeah, anyway, you get the idea, you get the sense of keeping the old, inserting the new, the tanks, the walls. This is, I'm particularly proud of this little piece where we just cut down, in keeping with the whole recycle idea, we slice down that wall, and the bit that we slice down, we just fold over and lay down as the pathway, so nothing wasted. It just, I don't know, I like the composition, the sandstone, the old sandstone and the concrete. I think that's quite nice detailing, but that's me. The walls, I'd finish off on the walls because I think the walls are quite beautiful. Can you imagine going to a client who originally expected Sydney sandstone, which you can see a bit up there already, and it be all cut sandstone, and then going along with a bag of broken rubble bricks and concrete. By the way, it's brick. Broken, unfortunately, but there's a long-term use for brick at every level. So, the idea that this would be built on the edge of Sydney Harbour, this was a radical thing. You are only as good as your client, and this client, once they bought into this whole story, logically followed us through and said, well, yeah, I can see what you're going to do. But I really like it texturally from a distance. It also solves all graffiti problems because people don't do that. And then as you get closer, you see there's a detail, there's a control to those edges. And then ultimately, and this is the last shot for it, there's an upfront quality about the elements that are embedded in it. Just so you know, that's my 21st birthday mug that my dad gave me. I didn't tell him I put it in there, but. So it's that layering that I really quite like about the project. So just quickly, I want to finish on just a couple of projects that are, this one's a kind of a project that we did in Berlin, and again it's that idea of a story driving it. So this is Tempelhof Airport in Berlin. The idea here is they didn't have a lot of money, so they wanted to try and come up with a quick solution how they could solve the problem. There's a building at the back there that you may see, but this was not built by Speer, but it was built in Hitler's time, and the idea that that international travel would be a major factor in the future of the world. So to give Hitler credit, I mean, he's a visionary. He saw the future, and this was it. So, but it run its course. You can see the runways there. This runway and this runway. And so basically what we tried to do is just keep everything as much as possible. And so the outer edge is these birches that kind of completed the arc of the building. that building had a half arc. We just completed that arc, and the idea was that each person from around the world would buy one of those trees planted, and that would save them a lot of money, but it'd also be a symbolic gesture of this coming together after the war. And then the remainder was that the internal area would be kept. The interesting thing is Hof in German means, or Hof means a protected area. And so the idea that this central area would be protected and retained as it was. Okay. I'm pointing, I'm doing... Yeah, there we go. So you can see the internal area inside the poplar tree, the birch trees, and just the wildness of it, just keeping it very wild, the connection through. We dug out a little bit of a scraping because the water table was extremely high, and the idea that water could be introduced as part of that element. The runways kept for their own integral, interesting qualities. And then the soil that we dug out for the wetland or for the water area, we made a hill, and that became a place for, I think, young people to do raves or things of that nature. Can I get this next one?
Shall I have it?
Can I help? Batteries. There we go.
Okay, so this one I'm going to do very quickly, but this is a project that John and I did together, and it's for I don't want to dampen the mood, but it's for a cemetery. Does that dampen the mood?
No.
Yeah, a little bit. So it's in Western Sydney, and this client came to us and said, look, I want to do a Muslim burial Muslim cemetery. Got this great idea. I want to clear all the land, put Lebanese pine trees all the way around, a road with 3 roundabouts, and I want you to design the roundabouts. I want water features, and I want swans, and he was looking at me, hoping that I get more and more excited by the minute. And I was okay. But the funny thing, it was absolutely beautiful landscape, Cumberland Plain, which I don't know if you know, very important in Sydney. And so I came back with a suggestion to him that absolutely changed the positioning of it. And it kind of took its precedent from the idea of the Arabic walled cities. And so it set up a structure in the landscape where we had, I'm sorry, I think I've got it right. So I'll take you in the sequence through it. So you start out and you walk through the landscape. In this elevated walkway, a chance to kind of just engage with the whole burial process. It gradually leads up to this walled city that you enter, which is reminiscent of the one I showed you. And then once you pass through that wall, the idea, I'm fascinated with the idea of landscape in Australia. We struggle very much with the idea of native versus non-native. You know, if you plant non-native, then it's not of our ken. And I'm always interested in that because I'm a white boy. You know, I'm not Australian in the truest blah blah. You know, so anyway, so this internal area is like crossing into that other world. And so everything changes once you're in the other world. It's all exotics. It's kind of Shangri-La type experience. So the experience of possibly going to heaven, if you will. I haven't actually used the most recent drawing stone, as you well know, but it is a brick. I'm hoping to pick up an extra few bucks doing this, John. Just letting it out there. So anyway, so the idea that the central piece becomes a kind of other space. And then the internal area would also allow for burial of interment of ashes. And then the ultimate area where you would actually bury the people out in the natural area. The idea was that there would be no headstones, that the memorialisation would be the retention of the landscape itself. And so that leads into a natural burial system which is kind of being used around Europe to a certain extent at the present moment, growing. But it's the idea that the memorialisation is in the saving of the landscape. And so ultimately that was the objective, to keep that quality what it was. Last one, I'll finish off. So Glenorchy Sculpture Park is part of Mona. I know Tasmania, I don't know if any of you have been there, quite a beautiful project. This is an extension to it, so Mona is up there. And we've been tasked to do a design for entrance to Mona via a sculpture walk that would then arc itself around and back to Mona. So we worked with Room 11 on this one, and you can see the kind of arcing connection back to the Mona building. And then as we get closer, the design was really about a box entry building that Room 11 were doing. It was an old point of call for barges that used to come into this area anyway, so it had a kind of concrete surround to it and pad. And so we tried to work with that. And so we added in this wall and this containment, very, very, very harsh landscape, howling winds in winter, bitterly cold, really a very intense landscape. And so what we tried to do is actually as a little landscape as possible and let nature take its course. And so this is the entry to it, the wall, the simple grasses coming back. This is the building, Room 11 building with the simple glass. The plants low, just grasslands, respecting the concrete pad as much as possible, what was already there. It ultimately became quite a very successful gathering place. And when the, I think the Cumbrias started flowering, really quite spectacular, but that wasn't what I was after. What I was really after was this. And it was about the simplicity in a lot of ways, and this is the last slide so I can relax. It was a lot about the finding of the nothingness, the retreat of the design as much as possible. How little can you put in and it still work? Maybe it goes back a little bit to the idea of what's the sound of one hand clapping? Maybe, you know. But as my father, the fitter and turner in the factory would have said, maybe it's just bullshit. Thanks.
Our next speaker is John Choi. Crofi is a practice name derived from the first two letters of the surnames of the three directors, John Choi, Tai Rapia, and Stephen Figuera. The practice was founded in 2000 following the success of winning an international competition for the redesign of the TKTS booth in Times Square, New York. How fantastic was that? This project was a smart and dramatic design which has been widely acclaimed for the way in which it not only provided a new home for the Times Square ticket booth, a very popular venue, especially for tourists, trying to get those last cheap tickets, but for how the design also provided public as well as private benefits, while simultaneously improving and strengthening the essential character of Times Square. The fundamental philosophies of that project then informed how Crofi shaped their practice. A practice that sees design as a tool to extract both commercial and public value, function and form, experience and meaning from their projects. The practice studio in Manly is also still highly bespoke in their approach, often reframing projects to look beyond any given site and brief to bring broader design opportunities and aspirations to each project. All that interspersed with regular surf breaks. Crofi has a demonstrated history of experience in residential, public and urban projects. John Choi graduated from Sydney University in 1996 and worked with Hassel, Allen Jack and Cottier and New South Wales Public Works. He was design architect for the Gordon Yu Hoi Chu building, University of Sydney, which received the 1998 RAIA New South Wales Architecture Award for public buildings, and was joint project architect with Tai Rapia on Fox Studios Australia car park, which received the 2001 RAIA New South Wales Commendation for Commercial Buildings and the 2000 National Dulux Colour Award for 4 commercial buildings. Just a few of the projects John has been responsible for are the TKTS project in New York, Macquarie Street apartment tower in Sydney, Parramatta Road strategic plan, Ballast Point, together with Phil, the Luna de Sang project, and, as I mentioned earlier, the Ian Potter National Conservatory in the Australian National Botanic Gardens in Canberra. The competition announced recently, working together with Phil. I'm sure we'll be enlightened about some of these projects tonight. Please welcome John Choi.
I will start my clock as well here. I've got a lot to get through here tonight, so it will be fairly rapid, fast-paced.
It's okay, go for
Thank
it.
you very much, Stephen and Bob, for inviting us, and it's a pleasure to be here together with Phil as well, and seeing those slides bring back lots of memories, particularly those potato stamping moments.
I didn't tell him that, John. You can tell him that.
No. Parramatta Road. Look, the way that I'd like to frame the talk today is a sort of a mirroring between, I guess, the strategies the practice deploys and the work itself. So it's not going to be a kind of a slideshow of the projects, really just trying to give you an insight to the thinking that we bring to our projects. And as a kind of an intro, it is I think, quite an appropriate one with the pairing, because I think for us, fortunately with some background from Hassel days where we did get some exposure to the crossover in the Times Square, we've kind of had this sort of view of design as a kind of a more layered and more complex, evolving phenomena, and don't really see any divisions between architectural, landscape, or urban design, etc. Oh, got it. Thank you. Okay. So looking through design through the trajectory of time, it's a very fascinating phenomenon. It's, at the core of it, matter is taken out of the ground and recombined to incredibly complex things as the environment that you see around you. You know, played out over a long, long length of history, it's really like alchemy. It's like kind of this emergence of incredibly complex and rich things from nothing. So what is it that architects create? Is it buildings, cities, experiences, economies, brands, or cultures? By default, language separates, but for me, everything comes under the one universal design space and one long trajectory. Earth is a closed-loop system. It receives a constant amount of energy from the sun, and it contains a constant amount of matter. Nothing escapes. Matter is simply reshaped and reconfigured. In this framing, the built environment can be seen as a continual resurfacing of the ground, shaped by the evolving needs and desires of people. Architecture is a temporal permanence in the flow of matter, energy, and ideas. This equation by Buckminster Fuller is very revealing. Wealth equals matter times energy times knowledge. What's amazing about this equation is matter and energy are constant. The only variable that converts the matter and energy to more productive state, the more valuable things, is knowledge. And by wealth, I mean both the quantitative value, the needs of people, the qualitative value, desires of people. So it's not just limited to utilitarian functional dimensions of our lives, but really the full spectrum of cultural things such as music. And the accrual of that knowledge expands humanity's access to the measurable things that we need to live and the immeasurable things that we live for. Collectively, wealth can be seen as the earth carrying capacity for life. This graph of the world's population, as you can see here, has gone through a tremendous trajectory. So the population in height across here and the timeline across the bottom. And as you can imagine, in the early days, our capacity to reconfigure our environment was limited to making simple tools to hunt and appropriating caves to live in. Hence the population was limited where there was food, water and temperate thermal conditions. The life that so many millions take for granted today is radically different, of course, from those earlier days. This is GDP indexed to inflation per capita, a very kind of rudimentary graph of the wealth described earlier per person. The truly incredible thing about this graph is that this has occurred concurrent to the population graph that you've seen previously. So if one looks at the life of an average middle-class citizen today, the food we eat, the places we live and work, our education, entertainment and travel patterns, it's a life that only kings and queens could afford only a few generations ago. We effectively have 1 billion kings and queens roaming the planet and consuming a lot of our resources. So how did this happen? And some may say that's a discovery of crude oil, and I think but I think it's only part of the truth. This is a clue is to look at the industry sector variation over time. So this graph here, the darker one down the bottom is the primary sector, middle secondary sector, the top tertiary sector, and again timeline across the bottom. The primary sector is the part of our economy making direct use of natural resources, agriculture, forestry and mining. Relevant here in WA. Secondary sector, Australia is very good at the primary sector. Secondary sector is manufacturing, taking the raw materials and making physical goods. Tertiary sector is the soft part of our economy, activities where knowledge is used to improve productivity, performance, and importantly, imagine new possibilities. It also includes intangible goods such as entertainment, culture, and education. So as you can see here, in the early days, most of our lives were involved with collecting food, perhaps a little bit of time in tool making and tiny bit in organising ourselves. And this contrasts heavily to the modern day where only a small portion of our population, a global population, is involved in the primary industries. An increasing number of us are involved in the knowledge production. And when you combine this graph with the previous three graphs, there's a powerful pattern which shows the Bucky equation playing out over time. So to give you sort of some visual to do, so I'm just going to do a rapid, fast pace of the last 2 million years in human history. And it does, I think it's useful. Well, I guess what I'm trying to do is paint a relationship between people, the built environment that we live in and culture that surrounds it. So 2,600,000 BC, stone tools, 200,000 BC, Homo sapien, reasoning, introspection, 100,000 BC, spoken language. 7,000 BC, agriculture. 4,000 BC, city-state. 3,600 BC, writing, knowledge transfer beyond oral means. 3,000 BC, trade. You can see in this print the close relationship between people, culture and the built environment. Agriculture in the foreground showing rudimentary infrastructure containing water and pathways. Animals that are raised rather than hunted in the middle, and this reliable food supply affords this society to expand their constructed world to better serve them. The group of men up the top here, perhaps building one of these storage structures to keep the food off the ground. 800,000 BC, early infrastructure. 500 BC, democracy. 400, Silk Road, East-West exchange. 1400, Renaissance, 1440, Gutenberg printing press. 1650, Enlightenment. 1700, scientific revolution. 1800, Industrial Revolution. 1903, the aeroplane. 1936, the Turing computer. 1990, the World Wide Web. The built environment is inseparable from culture, economy and technology. And equally, what shapes our experience of the world is multi-layered, much more than the physical dimensions. To me, design is like trying to thread a needle through a maze of different fields, a bit like acupuncture, trying to pass through obstacles and energise key layers of itself, but also the interrelated effects between those layers. I see design as an act of reshaping the flow of matter, energy and ideas to a more productive state. I won't read this quote out, but it is a quote, you can read it yourselves. It's really a quote that looks to, it's a quote that's inspired myself to sort of really put a lens on what we do as architects. We often sort of get, in the context of that background, there's a kind of a strong disjunction as a practice, because as a practice, your capacity to imagine new possibilities and how that might be of some value in a broader sense, you often don't have that as a starting point. You have a client, you have a brief, and often a lot of the constraints, basically a site, what goes in there, the relevant network, quite a lot is already established when someone comes to you as an architect. What's been interesting through us, and we've had the fortune of having competition processes drive a lot of our practice, to have the sort of the platform to think about our way of practicing in a different way. But we're now starting to see how that's informed the way that we might engage with clients with more agency than a strict kind of brief-driven way. This quote is really can be read in lots of different ways. For us, we like this quote because it empowers us to look at architecture in that more expanded way and to really look beyond the immediate brief and position projects in that bigger context outside of itself. Competitions are obviously a really great vehicle, and this sort of idea of expanding the scope or throwing the lens outside the project itself is something that we find ourselves constantly doing. So design becomes kind of an expanded mode of inquiry to see what the project can do in a broader sense rather than the design of the project itself. So I think the Times Square, as Stephen mentioned, is very foundational for the practice. Not only because it gave us the trajectory to start, but really a lot of the core kind of spirit of what we're trying to do. We can see some tie back into that. It was a competition, international competition, or really at the time, think of it, there's an architectural project, and how do you come with a full ticket sitting in your Times Square? So it was the brief asked to replace this ticket booth. It had been there for 25 years. And they were looking to build a permanent new home for the Broadway ticket function. But rather than for us asking kind of what kind of ticket booth can we design, we asked what can this project be for Times Square in New York. So the first observation was that dominant urban experience on Manhattan is that of the street grid. And then the grid relents, it's typically a grid park. Times Square was a really rare condition where the grid opened to create an urban room. So we felt really uneasy actually about placing anything in that space, because anything that sits above your sideline starts to kind of change the unique character that's in that location. Second observation was that it was really a place that was experienced from the periphery. So even though Times Square was one of the world's best known destinations, people simply had nowhere to stop and enjoy being there. To us, it was like a theatre without seats. So from these observations, we used the booth project to invert the existing condition and create a centre and a destination where both locals and visitors can pause and sit and enjoy what's on offer. It was a simple gesture of a series of red translucent steps forming an inclined public space with a ticketing function housed underneath. It also formed a respectful backdrop to the nearby statue of Father Duffy, which is the namesake of this part of Times Square. And in order to give that more potency, given the environment is so charged, visually charged, it's lit from below to have this sort of have sufficient sort of visual strength to sit there in that context. It is a project that does sit across boundaries, urban design and architecture, and to some ways set design, because it really sort of curates one's personal experience and relationship to the space. The concept expanded the focus of the project and ultimately led to reconsideration of the plaza itself and examining of how the project itself could energise Times Square. It's changed and recalibrated how people use and understand Times Square, and it's gone from a place that operated from the edges to now from the centre outwards. This is a photo just before the opening, sort of a rare moment before the fences are just down. There was hoardings, it's been hoarded, it was a tough construction of over 3 years and down. So you can see the design itself is really fairly simple. And really, I think it's not so much, again, it's not the lens of looking at the architecture itself. It's really kind of what it does and how it's actually all the other effects that it does to the place. That's the design of it. The design's not bad. I mean, that's a fun part of it. It's an enabler for a whole thing to play itself out. So this is the shot of the booth during the day. And I must say, one of the most delightful things seeing the booth and Phil was he came with us on that day talking about our relationship. And the loveliest thing we saw was after it opened, there was a bunch of people that will sort of come up to the stairs, and then they'll do a little tap dance. It's like they're kind of arriving at the centre stage, and they just arrive at the world centre stage, and they're here to perform to the world itself. And it is that sort of double metaphor that we also like, that it is kind of the seats to the theatre of that space as well as the stage in the middle of everything. And it very much acts kind of like because the tremendous amount of noise around you and movement, it kind of acts as like a rock. You're sitting in a rock in a flowing river, and you're just slightly elevated, but you can still feel all the energy around you. And so this is, I'll just see whether this works, a little video. No.
Okay, there we go. Good try, not available.
It's all right.
Oh, no.
That's all right. This is a favourite shot, obviously. People just using it as their public lounge. Because New York is so, because it doesn't have that urban gathering space, as shown in that early kind of analysis, it just naturally became a gathering spot. And because it is simple, for us it was nice to see it sort of taken up quite readily in popular culture, because that is a very much part of how these kind of destinations work in terms of the identity of the city itself. This is a conservatory project. The other sort of strategy we deploy is really looking at how aspects of our built environment evolve over time. So you're looking for a gap between the typological norm of that day and the current social, economic and technological conditions to imagine some types of built environment projects. I'd say like workplace design. Workplace design has evolved heaps. So the way that we might want to carry out and serve that function, it's sort of, it's caught up in quite alignment. And I'll say cemeteries, when we took that project on, huge gap between what we found, even just doing that demographic study and things about how people wanted to remember their loved ones and celebrate the passing. For a lot of people aren't the headstones and graves and those traditions. So, but there is the new sort of type hasn't quite yet emerged, and so we saw that as an exciting kind of possibility. I guess from my perspective, that's what engaged me into that project mostly. So this is a really good, hence very, very happy to win this competition, because this does sort of play to that interest of the practice. So one of the things that we did on the conservatory competition is really look at where does conservatories come from? Why does it exist? Why did people kind of, where did it first start, etc. And interestingly, it just kind of started apparently because some royals back whenever needed certain kind of medicine to help them with their ailment, but it wasn't grown locally enough. So they, the servants sort of thought of, well, let's create a little warm environment and grow that. And later, it wasn't for kind of medicine; it was just to have exotic fruits, the orangeries, etc. Was it? And what was interesting is that although those early days had a very kind of practical, functional purpose. Particularly as glass and steel technology and heating technology came through, things like Crystal Palace really captured people's imaginations of these sort of amazing kind of constructs of new kind of environments within what they could hold. So the spectacle of these things we saw that take a strong trajectory. Whilst the commercial environment of greenhouses still continued on, particularly in botanic gardens and public settings, there was a spectacle of that that became dominant, I guess, in modern day, a visitor economy attractor. So, but what we start to think about, glass is a really, really poor insulator. So we looked further into that. So the question sort of arose, it's a public group, Botanic Gardens, really trying to promote the value of our natural environment, hence this sort of question of, well, how do you do a environmentally sustainable conservatory sort of came into our headspace. And that was a really interesting thing because this is a tropical conservatory in Canberra. And conservatories in general are really, they have inherent thermal challenge. You're trying to create foreign environments in a climatic zone that's different. So we used this for the client. They gasped when we presented this. So which uses more energy to maintain? A ski resort in Dubai summer on the left, or a tropical conservatory in Canberra winter? One would think that it would be the ski field in Dubai, given the high temperature differential. But because glass is such a poor insulator, the tropical conservatory is harder to maintain. The R value, which is the measure of the thermal resistance to heat flow per unit of surface area over per unit of time, you can see in this middle graph here, glass down, even double glazing down here at R.5 versus what might be just a common cool room wall technology is up at 7.5, performing 15 times better than double glazing. The other reason glass is often used is, of course, for daylight. But what we found was, particularly for tropical rainforests, not a lot of light actually gets down to the lower stories or the mid stories. It receives the high stories. So we really started to think about a building that might mimic what you might find in that kind of condition, that it is much more top lit rather than lit in the full round. The other thing that the key question we asked was, because the trajectory of the type went so far as a spectacle, as a kind of a symbolic attractor in landscape, in that setting, but really the kind of internal experience is pretty kind of uniform. You've got a uniform environmental condition, and the architecture doesn't do much to really make that experience that distinct and diverse. So what we looked at is a different way to create that. It's more like a cathedral with a series of chapel rooms, and rather than moving up in height, you stay on level and the ground level drops off, so that you can see the different kind of parts of the foliage. And they're in section, probably easier on that TV screen than here. So you can see the main volume space, and then it's surrounded by smaller spaces where the ground level drops off. See that in plan. So you can see as a sequence experience, it sits there fairly as a kind of, it's been called a hovering cube, and we'll get to that. It sits as a mute object that contrasts with the environment around it. And again, sort of the non-physical dimension is something that we're really interested in. Because it is warm, you'll tend to get some spillage of that heat and humidity, that sense of that coming out from the building, and that's part of the experience effect coming into the forecourt. And the forecourt gives you a very dramatic kind of entrance. You're up on a building that is 17 metres tall, and the only thing kind of you see is a thin sliver just sort of here between where you enter, and just giving you a sort of a clue to what's within. You come in kind of on one edge of it, where you are beside that tall volume, as well as the secondary sort of chapels in the space. This gives you a very good feel for the sort of things that we're aspiring to do. It's sort of very kind of immersive experience for the visitors, and one that is really intertwined with the architecture. The architecture forming a part of that experience rather than the exhibition display itself being the sole thing. Image of the centre. And that also, as a section, allowed us to do something where the double walls, concrete wall in the inside with the polycarb wall on the outside allowed us to create like a supercharged section where the thermal collection of there's this technology called transpiring walls, which effectively is a very simple, non-mechanical way of capturing the solar energy and redistributing it inside. And the thermal mass being on inside allows us to play with different ways to kind of charge that energy and store it. So during the cold nights that it can go through without using the energy. These are shots of the model in that landscape. Okay, so the other thing that we often find ourselves, particularly with developer clients, is there's always a commercial imperative, and absolutely, it's not. We don't really see money as a kind of bad, negative thing. It's really it's a nature of. It's actually just the exchange medium. So there's people needing to. I won't go into it, but that's not So what we often find, but sometimes, that people see public outcome and commercial outcome as being on opposite sides. What we're really looking for is an opportunity to bring those two together. And in Sydney, we have this really unique situation where there's a policy in the city of Sydney where any development on a site over a certain, or over 50 million, is it, Steve? 50, yeah, over 50 million, has to go through a design competition. I don't think there's such a thing that exists anywhere else in the world. So if you're a private owner, imagine you're just an average person who owns a site in the city. Right? You can't even choose your architect. You can't even choose the design. You have to run a competition, and you get to choose two jurors, and the city gets to choose two jurors. And out of that process, the outcome itself is what you take forward. And I guess it's the city's view that the design, these built projects in those have as much public impact as the needs of the private development, and sets it set up. And what that's set up is really the way to try to win it is from the view of the jurors, which represents a combination of the commercial interest and the public interest, is to come up with some idea that can do both more. So we were given a go at this this is the Macquarie Street project in that dot there. It sits amongst a whole lot of complex sites where it's located. Cluster of low-scale historic buildings in the round, different mix of scales, whilst very tall towers are sitting right behind it. Wildly varying scales of projects. So you can see currently the area is quite flat. There's not a lot of activation or movement or usage because it is not of great condition, and there isn't a lot of population in that area. So this is an image from Macquarie Street looking up. So the basic strategy we found, and I guess that in terms of the process we went through, just to sort of get to where's our entry point, where can we think of something that can add some value in a way that perhaps sort of the norms wouldn't necessarily do. So it was a whole process of just trying to uncover. I think we just, we spent our sort of I think a whole year's budget during this competition because we just looked at every angle. We said, okay, if we wear the hat from heritage, what are the key sort of issues? Of course, they want to reveal all the heritage character of that area. If you look at it from the commercial basis, what are things driving the value of these apartments? If you look at it from a buildability point of view, it's a tough site to get access. So we called up a builder friend and said, well, if you're going to build on this site, just forget about any design, just tell me what is the simplest way to build this, right? So we're just trying to attack it from various different angles. And at the end, what we've sort of pulled ourselves into was essentially two strategies below that podium level, a series of moves that really sort of activate and create that relate to the heritage setting and create new kind of urban spaces in the way that you can knit into the city. And above, really kind of tweaked to maximise commercial value for the developers. So on the ground level, what we did was we set up a strategy where the lobby was actually going across here, circular quays here. So there's a natural design line from what might be a Macquarie Street address down through the site, down the heritage CSE to Circular Quay. And the setup of these do as much to borrow off existing character of the heritage buildings that are already on the site as well as adjacent to the site. The new project gives some curtilage, so these projects can be buildings in the round, which they are. They have elevations on 4 sides that were really being appreciated. So your lobby experience with a double height space through here is about as much about kind of revealing and lighting this facade as much as what you've put in yourself really as a kind of a receptacle to reveal other characters that are already there. This is a 6-storey cross volume that can kind of frame this heritage element, as well as the small figure and the gaps through here to other heritage characters through here. Creating a small public space on the northern side of the building allowed a sort of a public space that doesn't exist in this part of town, and something that would work equally well for the commercial tenancies here as well as the residents themselves. So that's the sort of view of that courtyard, and the back part of that heritage building, and the building kind of being opened up on the ground level. A view from kind of upper level of the lobby. The other key thing we looked at was really on the commercial return, and it was interesting sort of doing a ring around the colliers and other sort of key agents that go, well, what drives value? Is it north facing? Is it cross ventilation? Is it size of bedrooms? What living areas, etc. And really, not a lot of people could give us very clear guidelines. They just generally tend to point to the last project that sold well and say, well, they're a good thing. So. So we sort of kind of had this mental thing that, you know, in a typical developer equation, you might be targeting 20 or 30% profit. That's off a sales price, and a development cost, which might be partly the site cost and construction cost. And typically, you're trying to increase that by reducing your construction cost down, right? Rather than, and what we found quite interesting is that, in fact, a 10% increase in sales price could have a 50% increase in profit. In fact, the lever to profitability can be much more in terms of in the upside, the value side of what you sell, not necessarily the cost side of the equation. So in the hunt for that, we did the cheeky thing looking at the development that the client is selling at the time further up the road, which had a similar sort of view relationship. Really want to understand what the view does, because in some part, so this is a development where this was the view to the harbour. The view, this was $24,000 a square metre as opposed to southern face. These ones get good city views, but they only get 15,000. And we saw other ones that even the difference between ones that get kind of more full view to a more kind of view where you have to kind of stand and not be directed. So it became a game of analysing those views and maximising those views on the site, and that was also concurrently the vehicle to give the architecture a lot of bit more expression than what we might have otherwise done. So these are some analysis, typical thing with a balcony in front, which ended up with a floor plan as such. We really maximised that view, giving that kind of full breadth to that view. As it fronted the Botanic Gardens rather than a kind of an apartment that was defined by balconies. We're really looking at building form as a whole. So this sort of interesting figure, which acts as a kind of like a pivot point for the ensemble of heritage elements that sit around it. Tons of different studies, just using kind of more limited means of expression on the mullion, but how do we give it more interest and character? So the renderings through there. One time it had a roof full, and in these sort of things where it frames that heritage element from key view, from Circular Quay. So this last project is more classic architectural project, and it's also about what we do as designers, and in this case it was a project very sort of strong client, very ambitious and design-aware client. Andy and Deidre came to us, sort of was really suspicious to whether to engage us first. You know, it's like later on, they'd seen 4 other architects. We were the 5th architect on the job, so it all made sense. But they were very kind of tentative. He came in once, and then he sort of waited another 3 months, and then came in and said, "Oh look, I'll pay you. Just come up." Which, you know, it sounds good, but it's like, I really, you know, if I don't like you, I'm just going to get you rid of you like this. So up to site, he gave me a full brief and came up. And at the time, from the briefing, I just thought, well, it's a site out of Sydney in northern New South Wales, a rural property. I really thought it was, someone who wants to build kind of a show house and have those sheds and various other farm structures as a kind of a ancillary to the main thing that they might want to achieve. What realised sort of coming up, he'd started this forestry project, so you can see this is sort of later on, but you can see those new trees being sort of planted, and in the future it will look like this. When we first started, obviously it was even before something like this, and there was a kind of arriving at site, there was workers everywhere. There was, maybe had a crew of 15 people working the site, and they'd been going through this for a year and a half by the time we started. And we just ended up having this conversation going, well, how long do these trees take to grow? And he said, oh yeah, the quick ones about 60 years, but the decent ones take 300 years. And I'm looking at him, and I know he's got kids with kids, because that's what he wants me to decide. I just had an innocent observation saying, so you're doing something that you're not actually going to see in your lifetime. And I think that kind of dialogue, or that kind of observation, really became a changing point. Or a sort of a clarification point, I guess, for the client, that they saw the project being something that is much more of value in a different kind of context than perhaps the way that they might have felt it intuitively, but it's that sort of those conversations. So, everything, the architecture and everything else, of course, we worked for a long time to make beautiful things, but those moments, that's, I think, where does the value get realised? Where do you play a role in providing someone, a client or a site or a project, a value? And it's sometimes those things, and I guess it's all those non-physical things we find more interesting, actually, than the physical things that we design. Quickly, so the 2 sheds were the 2 structures we built first. We've got a family pavilion and other structures, guest houses and things that now. That's the shed 1 sitting in the landscape. So a lot was about really placemaking of the whole site. These structures really structure the relationship between the way that people can experience the site and the place they're in. So in a lot of ways, it has similarities to the Times Square project, that is much about sort of revealing and framing and focusing and setting up those relationships than the experience of the project within, or the form of the architecture itself. It's a double play between those 2 things. And Andy and Deidre talked a lot about vineyards and things, these sites that are super valuable because they've been loved and cared for over a long, long time. And money can't replace it, money can't do that. And I sort of felt like we were doing something, starting on this journey to build a site, transform a site that you won't actually see in your own lifetime is pretty rare. So how do we kind of create that, how do we mirror that commitment with the work so that it can represent that commitment? And the beautiful thing about this also dynamic is often sort of design ideas and things are shared through this forum like this, through our own, our own peers and things, the stories we tell between ourselves and other designers, etc. And the joy that I've had working on this project, because the client's been so engaged into the design process, the meaning and the value of the project lives through them as people that live and use the site, and the stories they tell to the workers, and the way that they start to understand the value of the project through that lens. So these are shots. I'll track this inside. It's a bit messier than this now. It performs really well thermally, lots of it. And you can see this, it's almost like the structure's waiting for that landscape to emerge. View from inside. It sets up sort of relationships. There's only a sliver of paddock that's left for private occupation. It's on that knoll through there, shot from the back. The front. Quickly run through these two. So this just needed to do a simple thing. It was a storage. Basically, the other shed was too nice, and it had a lot of stuff to store, so it just had to have cover and security protection, nothing else. So it's just a roof and a whole series of doors. That's it. It doesn't need anything else. So, and again, as it opens up, it reveals the landscape. It's inside. This is now full of the plants. Shots at the back. Various doors, detailing lots of doors. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Just to start with, I think we've been very fortunate, I think, to have heard the two of you speak tonight and to present what we do in a slightly different language, in a very passionate but gentle manner. And I think that's very intrinsic in how you guys are and how the work comes across. So that's pretty beautiful. But, and Philip, you started the conversation by saying you're telling stories. And you were telling stories tonight, telling us about the work, but your work tells stories. And I think that seems to be very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe we can talk about that between the two of you, because you tell stories to each other, and then that informs the work which tells stories to other people.
We talk all the time.
Yeah.
We're always
But that's important.
Yeah,
It's really important.
We've got
So-
a great dialogue, and I think that really helps. When we have a problem, because we live near Manly, or we work near Manly, we go out for a stroll, we go out around the beach, and by the time we've done that, we invariably come back and we've kind of got something to hook it into. I'm slightly different, John. I need this story thing that kind of is working for me. John's maybe a little bit.
So
He's a rewrite. That's it. You know, he needs to come in. It's like, but I love the way that both of us use one another to get to where both of us need to go. Funny though, isn't it? I think certain designers need to scribble and put stuff on paper. For me personally, it's almost like I go have it in my head, and then once it's in my head, I can start putting it down. And I don't think I've ever seen John.
As a consequence of that, as you said, a very cerebral, kind of intellectual kind of beginning in the whole presentation. I'm just interested to know what are in the stack of books beside your bed.
Very interesting.
to other people.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of, I guess, non-fiction really, is sort of science, and
I think that comes through.
yeah, and yeah, of course. But also like things like history books or biographies, sort of, just the interaction of how things, the phenomena of life, of economy. They're really interesting books. They're political economy books and things. So I don't think I have any design books. Very rarely.
Less a biography of the Rolling Stones and the Dismal World Band.
Well, there's a bit.
Sometimes there's a divergence. Related to that question that I was going to ask in a broader sense, because it came through particularly in your talk, John, and now that Philip's brought up the word cerebral, I was interested in your attitude, I suppose, to the role of research in practice.
Yeah.
Because that was very apparent in how you presented things, and apparent in, now that we know some of the work and have heard that it does relate. So could you expand a bit more on the importance of the lesson?
Yeah, hugely. I think it's just, well, it's just try to find trying to understand why we might do something. If you can do, you can do anything. So why do one thing over another? And just trying to, I guess it's the strategic part of the design process, trying to understand what really are the core things that you might, the core sort of opportunities or challenges that might be there in the project. And that when you understand, I guess when you can come to the right set of questions to ask and you feel confident they can help legitimise your decisions. The crafting or the formal or the other kind of dimensions of architecture, I think can be still played out in that context. But it's almost, I guess, yeah, it is probably personality. I just really feel like, I need that to make it feel like it's got some.
Do you find that makes it easier to discuss a project with a client, given that you've got that base to work on?
Yeah, definitely.
Because it legitimises some of your decision making.
That's right.
Through something that's more pragmatic.
Yep.
And allows you then to do other things.
Yeah, we're always looking for a compelling logic to the project. I mean, we love making beautiful architecture and things that are, there's a whole subjective, qualitative dimensions. And you'll see, both of us, we know, you can say, oh, it's because we did X or Y, we did these things, but you give the same very limited or very complex sort of project to 10 different architects, and they'll all have 10 different approaches and swear that they've been informed by the same constraints, etc. And there is a lot that is part of unconscious sort of bias in values and aesthetic choices and things. But maybe that's why also you're trying to find something that can anchor it.
And therefore develop an ideology and a framework within which to work.
Yeah.
On a broader sense, but also specifically for each project.
Yeah.
Interested to know, having arrived at the site with your sheds, what you actually said to the client to convince him that you were the right guys to actually proceed with the project.
That conversation, literally that conversation.
About the trees.
About
Just
the
the
trees,
tree.
how long did the trees take?
He understood.
Well, it wasn't so much.
That's when it clicked with him.
I think he hadn't realised that he's doing something that he's not going to see in his lifetime. Now, actually, how rare that is.
So was he really just driven by being environmentally conscious?
No, he doesn't have an environmental background at all. He's
So how is he planting the trees?
through an aesthetic interest in the trees, and in fact, he's made his money mining, and he sees the trees through a similar lens. One, it has aesthetic value, and
Turn the
it is a
microphone
resource that a lot of people enjoy enough and isn't being done because it takes so long to grow. So he's got a lot of money, this is a good thing to do, and he's such an open person, he just goes into new things. He lives his life, both of them, and the individual, live their life like kind of writing a book, chapters in a book. They're like fully committed doing one thing, and then they play that out for a while, and they'll shut that chapter and open a new one. And I actually haven't met people that are so open to go into new areas. Like if you get good at doing something, we all relate to each other as being designers. You don't suddenly go and join to become an accountant, right? Because it's a completely different field, etc. They just embarked on that journey in that kind of way, in a curiosity way. I'll just give this a go.
So you then gave him a framework around which to better appreciate what he was trying
That's
to do,
right. Yeah.
and to add other layers to what the possibilities are.
That's right. So it expanded what the project could mean to him and his family.
Because it's a true legacy project, isn't it? There's longevity there, it's a long way away.
Yep.
Yeah.
John, could you talk about the transition from leaving the corporate office from a use that term, to your own kind of circumstance on the back of New York. How are you proceeding to find appropriate scale of projects that will kind of allow you to investigate and pursue the kind of contextual and urban kind of ideas that are within these kind of areas of thinking?
Yeah. We won the competition when we were quite young, while we were working at Hassel. And so, although we had some ambitions to set up practice, really was just kind of were launched into it. But there was a huge break between the competition and the project was built. So really our career was built like any other emerging architect we were doing, you know. It was actually a kind of a strange situation because sometimes you do kind of felt like rock stars turning up to things. Thank you, Phil. But others, you know. But other times it was just like, you know, someone has recommended, oh look, you know, those Choi guys, they're good architects. So you turn up doing a bathroom renovation, and they're showing you the latest tile samples and things that they want to do. So, look, I think we've grown pretty much like any other architect. We've had the same challenges in trying to break through to demonstrate we've got capacity to it. But fortunately, with more increasing use of design competitions, we've really had our large breaks through that. So we've been fortunate, and I guess we now starting to feel some momentum and seeing sort of direct inquiries on the scale of it. But that brings other challenges, of course, because how do you don't set out to run a organisation. You just have this sort of ambition to do this kind of work. Then you realise it's
make it happen.
that's quite a big beast to try to make happen.
Philip, you might talk a bit more about that because your practice has grown.
Yep.
And you have offices outside of Australia and a range of projects like
person sitting in No, yes, I do actually. That's a very good question. And Bristol.
And Bristol, yeah. The scale of work, the complexities, the issues.
Yeah, I think the idea is that I think Australia design capabilities is second to none. And I kind of think, well, why can't we be everywhere? Why can't we be taking the best work going around? I want to do the best work. I want to be doing the most challenging work, you know? So where is it? Well, it's not just in Sydney. Sure, there's some good work. Perth's pretty good too. Next week. But you know what I mean. If you want to do it, you've got to go out there and you've got to put yourself in a position so you can do that work. And that's what I'm really interested in. I want to do and be in the position to do the best work. You only got a certain amount of time, haven't you? You know, there's a clock ticking, and that's what's driving.
Yeah. Okay. Additional to that, earlier we were having a little conversation about being in a partnership, and both of you are in partnerships, and you also work together.
Yeah.
And it's obvious to everyone here that you have a really good relationship, and this conversation that you have continues, and therefore it must be that you have a reasonably good relationship with your partners. Maybe you could elaborate a bit more on the complexities and the positive sides of the relationships. Yeah.
I feel like we're in therapy.
No, in that sense, but for an audience.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take it. Look, I always equate a partnership to a marriage, and then somehow or other you need not the same as you. You need something that's complements you. Bob, you know, and Steve, you know Adrian as well. I mean, you probably think poles apart. You know, he's got long hair, short. You know, he's not so good looking. But you need that counterbalance. You need that counterpoint. You need that somebody that can then fill in the gaps you're not particularly strong at. And I'm blessed, really, in having Adrian, because I can't even turn on a computer. And Adrian can. It's pretty good. But it's that counterbalance. And I think we all know about our own personal relationships. You need that person you can talk to, you can be honest with, that you can look in the eye and absolutely trust. if you can't trust your partner, where can you go? You know, because you're running a business, you're putting a life. I'm seeing more of Adrian than I am seeing my wife, you know. And I actually see more of John than I see my wife.
She's worried about that.
But she's happy.
She actually encourages it. I said, I'm going to work with John. Oh, right.
That's the therapy session. You're going to talk it out.
We can talk about that.
I mean, share very similar things to what Phil expressed. And I think, you know, starting off on a practice is not like you set out to start some empire. You start working with people you enjoy working with, and those things end up having a degree of momentum. And we work really, Ty, his strength is very much sort of more in terms of the planning and kind of a very methodical thinker through the things. Steve lots all the details and things, is very much just sort of task person. I think the challenge we're finding is actually as the practice has grown, our roles and what we need to do in terms of make this practice what Joy have created is the biggest challenge, and that's an ongoing.
Can I add one thing to that? I think these roles, it actually works. You have to align philosophically with that person. You know, it is fundamental. If you are not trying to achieve the same things aspirationally, then you can't even begin the conversation. And I think that's the thing that welds Adrian and I together. I remember his mum coming to me one day and saying, Phil, I've got to talk to you. Adrian's crazy, you know, you've got to talk to him. He only wants to do the best work and he's not going to take other work just because it's work. I said, well, that's exactly what I would. That's what we want to do.
We agree.
And she goes, oh no, you're crazy too. But the idea is that if you want to do the best work and you only go to do the best work, people are going to come and ask you to do the best work. You want to do
That's
crap,
what you get known for.
you're going to get crap. So that's differentiation, but it doesn't always work out so easily, you know. And so you have to be able to hold on tight. The hard times are, as you all know, yeah, exactly. You know. So you have to be there in the tough times, and if you can't be there in the tough times together, you know, it's all over. Really.
Just referring to the Parramatta Road competition, going way back, and that's when I first met you and Ty and Adrian as well. And somebody else involved, but I was the chair of the jury and had to convince James Werrett, but it wasn't about kind of the dimensional characteristics of pavements, it was about broader thinking.
Yeah.
And that seems to have kind of, the ideas that were in that seem to have generated a whole positive kind of attitude in the emergence of your practice and Adrian's. And that was the beginning of a relationship between the two of you.
It was the urban judo moment. Was very much so. And in terms of that, really, it was a combination of the Times Square and the Parramatta that really enabled us to really think about what we do differently. I think.
On the back of that, do you want to talk about what happened?
Well, in a simple sense, because it literally can be a book and a really interesting book. But look, we were fortunate because it was a project that was run, even though it was over a 21-kilometre metropolitan scale, it was run kind of rogue under this sort of group that didn't have a legal entity called Metropolitan Western Regional Group of Councils, by a third-party consultant project manager, and that set up that's supposed to have liaisons with state agencies, but because it was owned by some nebulous group, no one actually had much interaction. So us rascals basically got to kind of draft a, I guess at the time, pretty unique kind of integrated planning across the regional plan. But that was also what became the undoing of it, because there was no owner to make it realised. Yeah.
The site ran through a whole series of different municipalities run by different councils, and so none of them coordinate or had the authority to continue.
Yeah, but I mean, just on that, I mean, it was a project at the end, because we were given that free rein. we got to a point where we had support from people like Australian Conservation Foundations, together with the property industry, writing statements of support. So in a way, it was all set up if someone wanted to take it a bit further. But a whole series of uncertainties happened.
Yeah, there was a few legal issues, fees that weren't paid, etc.
Well, let's be honest. We won an international design competition doing this, right? Thank you. Any lawyers in the house? And when it came to paying us, they said, listen, what we'll do is we'll roll it in and we'll kind of get you going and work. And we then said after a year and a half, but when are we going to get that, that money thing that we were going to get paid? And they said, the last meeting, I said to Steve today, the last meeting we had when we put our hand out and they kind of said goodbye to us, they said, sorry guys, it's just not going to happen, good guys finish last. And at that point, Johnny and I walked out and said, we're going to take the court. 3 years later, we won the case, but God, we put our businesses on the line, we were paying barristers and it was just crazy. But a great experience. I now have a legal degree.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up in a minute. Are there any burning questions from the audience?
Yeah.
There's one over there.
I was just interested to hear further about collaboration, because you guys obviously collaborate well amongst yourselves, and other collaborations, and whether the success of the collaboration is down to a lack of ego, because there's an equal melting pot and you can bounce equal ideas. You can talk a bit about that, mate?
Can I jump into this?
Yeah.
Because you just nailed it. Can I be really rude? Will you not be offended? I hope you would. I call it the big dick syndrome. We walk up and they lay their dick out and they say this and what I've done, this is already in. And I said, we're going to get past that point. I was in a meeting once. I was in a meeting once and this guy came flown over from Europe, right? And we're sitting around doing this design session, very important project, and he just got up and he had his bag with all the tickets on it. And he started telling me how to, design and kind of treat me. And I just started drawing a big penis. And I said, look, we're going to have a competition about who's got the biggest. Then let's have a competition about that. If we're going to have to talk about design, let's talk about design. And I think that's the fundamental thing we've got to move past. This ego thing, it's everything. And I don't have to go through that, John, because we've already done the dance.
Well, he knows you already.
Yeah. That's right. But it is fundamental, isn't it? It's that meeting when you first walk in, that handshake, that kind of look in the eye, that kind of, okay, what caliber of person am I working with? And how do we break it down? How do we get to that point where we can talk to one another and get great outcomes? Well, that we're blessed because we've done a lot of that, but it's not easy in the first
So
place.
would you find, having said that the most successful collaborative outcomes have been through that sort of experience with like-minded people, or people not getting
For me,
the
definitely, I could not have done. I could not have done half those projects without it, and I got so much joy and so much more out of it because other brains bring so much interest.
On collaboration, I think it helps to have sufficient things of shared values already on the table, so the entry point for the conversation, etc. But if everyone obviously thinks exactly the same, you're not going to be much better now with that collaboration. It just gets the same thing. And it is a bit like that whole kind of knowledge times thing, is that, a history where what we have today is because we have different opinions. And so sort of clash of that. If we sort of appreciate that's what generates in the end, it's actually the differences that create the progress. You can, I think it's just, you can be sort of really, you may have a real different view to someone, but you realise this dynamic is actually the deal with it, what creates, a forward momentum and merge, what creates new things.
I mean, it may be the erasure of ego, but it's also about respect, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you respect the person you're working with, you respect the opinion of the other person you're trying to collaborate with.
Yep.
Do you think you've had clients that initially you didn't think you would have a good collaboration with and somehow came around. I mean, you kind of said it with Lynn the same, but in a different way, that the client wasn't really focused the way that you are now. But was there an experience where it seemed maybe a right turn? Or not?
Oh, no, I mean, it's just more, I think there's clients that, regardless of trying to really engage with them, it's just you don't job, just like there's collaborations that we've done that hasn't worked because we've tried and there's not enough entry point to really get a fruitful outcome. But for Andy and Deirdre, it was actually reverse. Some things that they pushed at the time, we thought, we don't really want, there's a beautiful wall into that shed one, which is quite organic, forming off the landscape into it. At the time, we were just thinking, it needs to be this hard line, to really kind of juxtapose it. So it was only after a long process, really, and then after it's finished, you could see actually, if we imagine what would have been, if it was the idea that we had, what came out was much nicer. Yeah.
Phil,
Oh.
thanks so much for taking us back to latent days with the inclusive over-the-top sitting out places were the beginnings of our kind of getting to know each other. And but what I've seen is the most incredible kind of shift from Hong Kong to Hobart, from that kind of collective, inclusive stuff to a minimal kind of reference to your experiences in Japan and the Buddhist realities.
Yeah.
I'll just comment on that kind of
The
journey.
Yeah, okay. I looked at that stuff, and every time I did it, I thought, wow, shit, this is going to blow their brains. They're going to look at it and they're just going to go, wow. And every time I went out and had a look at it, I went, oh, doesn't look that good, does it? I didn't get anything out of it. But when I was drawing it and I was going, yeah, look at this, the reality came when I looked at it and I started thinking,
You looked at the built work.
yeah, the built work, yes. And I realised it's not working. And then I started looking at timeless stuff that forever lasts, that is passing. And you just go, yes, Master, I understand. But it's not always that easy, and sometimes I think it's that crazy journey that you take to finally realise that. And that's why I talked a lot about the bits and pieces, because even while I recognised that I didn't fully understand it. What's the process of learning? I don't understand that either, but I know that at certain points something falls out and you look at it and just go, this is crap. Why? How do I reevaluate? Gradually. Yeah. But thanks for that, Bob.
I think we've been on quite an incredible journey tonight. We've had some great presentations, two exceptional speakers, architect and landscape architect, or designers overall. We have a draw before I make final comments. Shall we do that? Oh, we've got a question.
Yeah. Who does those CGIs in either office or of the cemetery?
Oh, we have poorly paid juniors.
We have a lucky door prize. Maybe one of the gentlemen over here can. Okay.
David, give you?
There it is.
So, can you please join me in thanking our speakers first?
Yeah.
Presentation. Please feel free to come and talk to them before we take them off to dinner. They're very open and generous in discussing all and sundry bits of information. On behalf of Brickworks, I thank you again for coming along to Double Talk for this year. We hope you enjoyed the evening and we look forward to seeing you again in 2017. And as I said before, if you aren't on the mailing list, please let these wonderful people know if you haven't put your card in, so that you can get invited again next time, and tell people who you think might be interested in this kind of engagement. Let them know as well so they can come along. So thank you again. Good night. Merry Christmas. See you next year.